On the night the Titanic slipped beneath the Atlantic, more than 1,500 people disappeared into the freezing darkness. But one survivor became famous for a different reason. She wasn't a movie star. She wasn't royalty. She was only 18 years old. And within a single night, she became one of the richest widows in America. Her name was Madeleine Astor, the young wife of Colonel John Jacob Astor IV, the wealthiest passenger aboard the Titanic. The disaster made headlines around the world. What happened afterward became one of the greatest untold stories of America's Gilded Age. Before she was Madeleine Astor, she was Madeleine Talmadge Force. Born in Brooklyn, New York on June 19, 1893, Madeleine grew up surrounded by wealth and privilege. Her father, William Hurlbut Force, built a successful business importing shipping supplies, and her family moved comfortably among New York's elite. Yet compared to the Astors, the Force family were merely wealthy. The Astors were American royalty. Their fortune stretched back generations, built on one asset that would eventually make them nearly untouchable: Manhattan real estate. By the early 20th century, the Astor family owned enormous sections of New York City. Their name appeared on hotels, mansions, charities, newspapers, and social registers. They represented the very top of America's old money aristocracy. Then came the man who changed everything: Colonel John Jacob Astor IV. He wasn't simply rich. He was one of the richest men alive. Inventor, author, real estate developer, military officer, hotel owner. By 1912, his fortune was estimated at around $87 million, worth several billion dollars today, depending on the method of comparison. But there was one problem. He was 47 years old. Madeleine was only 18. Their 29-year age difference shocked American society. Newspapers couldn't stop talking about it. Church leaders criticized it. High society whispered about it. Even members of Astor's own family reportedly disapproved. Yet despite the controversy, the two married on September 9, 1911, at Beechwood, the Newport mansion of Madeleine's mother. Almost overnight, Madeleine Force became Mrs. Madeleine Astor. The public fascination never faded. Every appearance became front-page news. Some viewed Madeleine as a young woman who had married for security. Others believed the couple genuinely cared for one another. Whatever the truth, their honeymoon became one of the longest and most luxurious journeys imaginable. They traveled across Europe, visited Egypt, cruised along the Nile, explored the Mediterranean. Then, in early 1912, Madeleine discovered she was pregnant. Rather than remain overseas until after the baby arrived, the couple decided to return home aboard the newest and safest ship ever built. A floating palace, the pride of the White Star Line, the RMS Titanic. It was advertised as the future of ocean travel. In reality, it was sailing toward history. When Titanic left Southampton on April 10, 1912, the Astors occupied one of the ship's most luxurious suites. They traveled with servants, personal belongings, and enough luggage to fill several cabins. Around them were many of the wealthiest people in the world: industrialists, millionaires, socialites, politicians. Each believed they were crossing the Atlantic aboard the safest vessel ever constructed. For 4 days, life unfolded exactly as promised: elegant dinners, afternoon walks, concerts, fine wine, conversations beneath glittering chandeliers. No one imagined the voyage would end in disaster. Then, at 11:40 p.m. on April 14th, Titanic struck an iceberg. At first, many passengers barely noticed. John Jacob Astor reportedly joked to Madeleine that the iceberg looked harmless. Within minutes, the crew understood the truth. The world's greatest ship was dying. By midnight, the order rang out across the decks: women and children first. Madeleine, pregnant and frightened, was led toward the lifeboats with the other women. John Jacob Astor asked the officers a simple question. Could he accompany his young wife, given her condition? The answer was no, not while there were still women aboard. Astor did not argue. He did not beg for a seat. Instead, he helped Madeleine into Lifeboat 4. He asked permission to simply light a cigarette and remain nearby while the boat was lowered. Witnesses later described him standing calmly on the deck, watching his wife disappear into the darkness below. It was the last time she would ever see him alive. What happened next has become one of the most enduring stories of the disaster. Astor was last seen helping other women and children into boats. Some accounts describe him assisting a young girl by dressing her in a boy's cap so she could pass as a child and board a boat still reserved for women and children. As the ship's angle grew steeper and the lights began to flicker, passengers who had laughed at the iceberg hours earlier now understood the truth. There would not be enough lifeboats for everyone. At 2:20 a.m. on April 15, 1912, the Titanic broke apart and sank beneath the Atlantic. John Jacob Astor IV did not survive. His body was recovered days later by a rescue ship, identified in part by the initials sewn into his clothing. He was one of over 1,500 people who died that night. Aboard Lifeboat 4, Madeleine drifted in the freezing darkness for hours. Around her, the ocean was silent except for the sound of oars, and in the distance the cries of those still in the water. She did not know if her husband was alive. She would not know for certain until the survivors were finally brought aboard the RMS Carpathia the following morning. When the Carpathia reached New York on April 18th, thousands of people crowded the docks, desperate for news of loved ones. Madeleine Astor stepped off the ship a widow, 18 years old, pregnant, and suddenly one of the most famous women in America. 4 months later, on August 14, 1912, Madeleine gave birth to a son. She named him John Jacob Astor VI, after the father he would never meet. Under the terms of Astor's will, Madeleine received a trust fund of $5 million, but only for as long as she remained unmarried. If she remarried, the money would pass instead to her son. For a time, Madeleine remained the grieving young widow the public expected her to be. But 5 years later, in 1916, she chose love over the fortune. She remarried, forfeiting her Astor trust entirely, and stepping away from the family name that had defined her since she was 18. Madeleine Astor would go on to marry twice more after that. Her later life moved largely outside the public eye that had once consumed her. She died in 1940, at the age of 47, the same age her first husband had been the night the Titanic sank. Her story is remembered today not just as a tale of survival, but as a portrait of what the Gilded Age truly cost the people living inside it. A teenage bride, a fortune built across generations, a single night on the Atlantic that took it all away, and a young woman left to rebuild a life out of the wreckage of America's most famous ship.